In that town, nobody was afraid of death. What folks were afraid of was how death got written down. I still remember the scrape of that chair across my office floor. Slow, careful, like the man didn't want to leave a mark, not even on old wood. It was late, past 9, and I'd locked up the viewing room more than an hour before. The flowers from the last service were still sitting off to one side, their sweetness tired and thick in the air, mixed with the stale smell of coffee I kept warming over and over in the thermos. A little radio on the shelf hissed at nothing. I left it on out of habit, the way some people leave a hallway light burning. He didn't take his hat off. It wasn't rudeness. He was too polite for that, but on a visit like that, the hat wasn't clothing. It was a signal. Sheriff Minton would come by without his hat sometimes, like a man. This fellow came in wearing his job from boots to brim. He sat down, folded his hands, and asked for something that sounded small. A sentence. One sentence on the right line, in the right place, the right way. He spoke like he was asking a neighbor to lend him a ladder, not like he was asking a man to lie. And right then, before I fully understood what was happening, I understood this much. What held that town up wasn't just bolts in the plant or nails in the houses. It was paper, signed paper, filed paper, paper that made everything else look normal. I didn't answer him right away. I looked at the typewriter in the corner of my desk, at the stamp with my funeral home's name on it, and at the ledger where I wrote visiting hours the way other men wrote down the weather. In my line of work, you learn early that words can weigh as much as a casket, but that was later, much later. Back in 1973, when I still thought the worst the town could ask of me was silence, I lived by a different rhythm. I lived like a man who believed routine was its own kind of promise. The town was small, but it wasn't soft. If you drove through on the highway, you'd see a handful of storefronts, a gas station with a crooked sign, the school's brick face, the church steeple, and beyond all that, the smokestack at the plant, sending up a steady ribbon like a heartbeat. And for us, it was. The plant made auto parts, things nobody ever thinks about when they buy a shiny new car and run their hand along the paint. Brackets, supports, stamped metal plates, hardware that went out by truck to Detroit or wherever, and came back as wages, mortgage payments, meat at the butcher, lumber at the hardware store. If the plant coughed, the town caught pneumonia. The mayor didn't hold more sway than the plant manager. The plant manager didn't hold more sway than the bank once the word credit entered the room. And the bank manager sat on the same church pew as the pastor. And between the two of them, they knew exactly when it was time to ask for calm. That's how the town worked. Everybody holding their own piece of authority, like a machine too big for any one person to run alone. My funeral home sat on a side street, 2 blocks from the courthouse and 3 from the post office. The building was old, wood siding, painted light, a front porch, columns my father had me sand down back when I was still a boy with skinny arms. We called it the house, and it was a house, because upstairs there were rooms where a family lived, but to the town, it was something else. The place where life stopped pretending it went on forever. You learn fast, in a place like that a funeral home is its own kind of station. Not loud, not festive. There was no celebration in what we did, but steady, with coming and going. People arrived in a hurry. People arrived slow. People arrived lost. Some came in angry. Others came in with a kind of calm that scared you more than tears, and every last one of them needed the same thing sooner or later, someone who knew what to do when nobody else did. Back in the 60s, when my father was alive, and I was just the kid stacking chairs and arranging flowers, the town treated death with more ceremony. Viewings ran long. Neighbors brought casseroles. Coffee brewed without stopping. Conversation stayed low, respectful. Then the 70s came on, and everything got shorter. The plant wanted its shift. People wanted things done quick. Life felt faster, and in a way, more brittle. Still, certain rules didn't change. The biggest one was simple. We don't put people on display. My father said it like scripture. The worst day of a family's life isn't the day you show off what you know. That was the code. You saw too much. You heard too much. But you didn't take ownership of somebody else's grief. I carried that code when he died, and the place became mine. And for folks who don't know, this work isn't just caskets and curtains. It's midnight phone calls. It's picking someone up from a place nobody wants to remember later. It's talking to a mother and father like you're holding something fragile. It's paperwork, pastors, music, flags for a man who served and whose own family can't recall the proper steps. It's setting a time so the out-of-town cousins can make it, and making sure a family that's broke doesn't have to suffer extra just because they're broke. It's also the kind of work that lets you see how a town behaves when it thinks nobody's watching. In the viewing room, the important man hugs the widow and talks about strength and faith. In the hallway, that same man leans in and asks, low, whether this is going to be trouble. It's always like that. One face for the room, another for behind the door. I learned not to judge too fast. Most people aren't evil. They're scared. They just want the world to keep running. In our town, keep running meant one thing above all. The plant couldn't stop. There was a music to the routine back then, and I knew it the way you know an old hymn. The house phone rang sharper at night, maybe because silence makes everything louder. If it rang after 11, I was up before the second ring. Mary, my wife, would roll over without opening her eyes, not because she didn't care, but because you get a tired kind of used to certain things. We didn't argue about it. It was just our life. I'd go down the stairs with my coat in my hand, careful of the old boards, and answer halfway down the hallway. Carver Funeral Home, I'd say, and wait. Sometimes it was the hospital. Sometimes it was a family. Sometimes it was the sheriff. When it was the sheriff, he always started the same way. Sorry to bother you this late. And I always answered the same way. That's what I'm here for. Sheriff Harold Minton was a man who knew how to smile with his eyes without being anybody's buddy, the kind that called you by your first name, but never let you forget he carried a badge and a sidearm, and the weight of the county behind him. The town liked him because he didn't make a show of things. He handled trouble quiet, and the town, quiet, thanked him for it. The old doctor, Dr. Klein, was another kind of authority. Steady hand, tired voice. He treated half the town and seemed to carry the other half around in his bones. He signed death certificates and talked about causes the way some men talked about weather. It happens. I respected him because he didn't do theatrics, but I also noticed he chose words the way a man chooses which doors to open and which to leave shut. Reverend Watkins was a man built out of careful sentences. Not fake, just a preacher. For him, almost anything could be turned into a test of faith. When a family didn't have money, he found somebody to help. When the town needed peace, he preached peace. Church was the place folks could cry in public without feeling weak. It was also where they learned, sometimes, to swallow questions. The bank sat on Main Street at the cleanest corner in town. Mr. Dale Patterson, the manager, spoke slow, like every word was advice. He financed cars and homes and repairs, and in a certain way, he financed pride, because a man without credit in that town was a man without ground under his feet. I knew all of them, not as close friends, but as parts of the same body, and my place in that body was a strange one, necessary but not welcome on ordinary days. Like the plumber, people only remembered you when something burst. When life was normal, I moved through town, nearly invisible. When death came, I became part of the room, part of the hallway, part of the smell. In 1973, I was in my 40s, and I'd already seen more goodbyes than handshakes. My place wasn't rich. I paid the bills, kept the building standing, a replaced carpet when I could. I worried about my hearse the way a man worries about his workhorse. It can't fail. There was a bigger funeral home over in the next town. Newer carpet and brighter lights. They sold packages and talked in modern terms. Our place was older, simpler, tied to the old way. Plenty of folks preferred that. People would tell me, If I go, I want you to handle it. You do it with respect. And in a town like ours, respect was currency. That's why I watched my words and my hands. I wasn't just providing a service. I was guarding a family's dignity when they were wide open. I was, in my own way, one of the men who helped the town keep moving after a fall. And when you have that kind of position, you learn something basic. Every town has secrets, but not every secret is yours to speak. The trouble is when a secret starts asking you to do work for it. At the start of that year, I still didn't think in those terms. I thought about keeping the place clean, keeping the hallway lamps working, keeping enough tissue on hand, making sure chairs didn't wobble. I thought, like most people do, that bad things happened by accident, and life was mostly built out of effort and luck. The first sign that I was wrong didn't come with sirens. It came as a detail, and in my line of work, a detail is what's left when everyone else has gone home. But before that, there were ordinary days. Coffee with Mary in the upstairs kitchen, sun through the curtains, short talk about bills and about our boy, who was near grown and looking beyond our little town. Sunday service, Reverend Watkins preaching perseverance, while people sang soft, each one holding their own private sorrow. And always the plant above everything. Men coming off the night shift with gray faces, heading to the gas station or home. When one of them passed me on the sidewalk, he'd give a small nod, like he was acknowledging something neither of us wanted to say out loud. You'll be there for somebody like me someday. It wasn't a threat, it was understanding. That town had a way of speaking without speaking. At the funeral home, I kept a ledger where I wrote everything down: names, hours, requests, who wanted lilies, who wanted the plain pine box, who needed to make payments. I wrote because memory slips, and because in the end it's the paper that proves what you did. That ledger started that year like it always did. Names I knew, old folks, long illnesses, hearts that finally got tired, sad cases, but expected one. Death that comes slow gives a town time to brace. I preferred it that way, not out of cowardice, out of mercy. When death comes sudden, it throws shrapnel. And it was on one of those ordinary days, after a simple service for an elderly man, that I noticed the first helpful visit that didn't feel purely helpful. A plant employee came by with a form to speed things along for future incidents. He spoke like he was doing me a favor, said he was getting things organized because there'd been a few mishaps and it was good to be ready. I thanked him, set the paper aside, and didn't make much of it. A big plant is a big machine. Big machines like forms. Still, I noticed the way he said mishaps, like he wanted the word to stay small. And I noticed too that while he talked, his eyes kept flicking toward my office door like he expected somebody else to step in. At the time, I didn't think corruption. I didn't think city hall. I didn't think scheme. I thought the world was getting more impatient, more bureaucratic, more interested in doing everything fast. I closed up that evening the way I always did, turned off the lights in the viewing room, checked the front lock, walked the hallway with my father's old photos on the wall, and went upstairs. Mary was folding laundry in the sitting room. She looked up and asked, the way she always did. No drama in it. Hard day, normal day, I said, and it was true. It still was. That night, I didn't know that you only recognize normal after it's gone. I didn't know my ledger, the thing I kept to stay organized, was going to become a record of something bigger than me. I didn't know that somewhere inside that plant, somebody was already writing the town from the inside out, with ready-made phrases and closed doors. I only knew the smokestack kept sending its smoke up into the dark, and as long as that smoke rose, the town would keep pretending everything was under control. And I, like always, was there to do what my father taught me. Take care of what nobody wants to look at, with respect, with quiet, and with paper. Back then, I still believed paper was meant to tell the truth. I hadn't learned yet that for certain people, Paper is what you use to hide it. My father used to say you learn two things when you spend your life around goodbyes. First, everybody's got a side they don't show. Second, dignity doesn't come automatic. Dignity is something somebody has to hold on to when the floor drops out from under them. He didn't say it like a philosopher. He said it like a man teaching a job. Same tone he used when he showed me how to lift heavy weight without wrecking my back, or how to close a door without letting it slam. Back then I figured he was just talking like an old man, the kind who's seen too many people cry and starts thinking that makes him wiser than everyone else. Now I know it wasn't wisdom for show. It was plain, working truth. The funeral home I ended up with wasn't some grand business that started big. My father built it out of almost nothing. He came from farm people, men who could mend fence, change a tire in mud, and keep their mouths shut when something wasn't theirs. When he got back from his time in uniform, he never talked much about that part, and I didn't push. He took a job as a helper at a funeral home in the next town. It was the kind of work nobody wanted, but everybody needed. He carried the stretcher, scrubbed the floors, set the chairs, answered the phone. The owner noticed two things right away. My father didn't ask useless questions, and he didn't laugh when it wasn't time to laugh. In that line of work, that matters more than muscle. He saved money slow. He figured out families weren't buying luxury. They were buying trust. And trust, in a small town, takes years to earn, and one loose comment to lose. Then a chance came to buy that old house on the side street, the same one I was living above now. It had a porch, a big front room, and a back room he turned into what it needed to be with his own hands. He signed the papers at the bank, like he was making a promise to God. I was still a boy when the house became the funeral home. People didn't even call it that at first. They just said, John's place, and for me it was strange. My home filling up with people in dark clothes, casseroles in their hands, voices kept low. I learned early not to run down the hallway, not to shout, not to bang doors. I learned there are hours when your front room stops being your front room. The first time I watched my father talk to a mother who'd lost a child, I understood he wasn't just a man with a trade. He was something steadier, like a post in the ground, not a hard post that orders people around, a post that holds when everything else is shaking. He didn't promise what he couldn't give. He didn't say, "It'll be okay." He said small, practical things. "You don't have to decide everything today. We'll take care of this. Have you eaten anything?" That was his code. Little thing, done the same way, every time. When I got older, I tried to get away from it. Not out of fear, out of wanting a different kind of life. I watched my friends go to the plant, draw a steady paycheck, come home, and leave the day behind them. I watched other boys head off to college, disappear into cities, and I kept thinking, who chooses to live surrounded by other people's worst days? Who signs up for a job where the phone can ring at 2 a.m. and erase whatever plans you had? For a while I tried being normal. I took a job at the plant, more to prove to myself I could than because I needed the money. I lasted 6 months. The noise of the presses, the repetition, the feeling that I was just another body feeding metal into a hungry machine, it wore something down in me. I'd come home with grit on my face and still feel like I'd done work that didn't have a name. The pay was better, sure, but my insides felt empty in a way I couldn't explain. My father didn't say, "I told you so." He just asked me one winter night if I could help him pick up a man who died at home. I went, mostly because I didn't have a good excuse not to. He didn't talk much on the drive. When we got there, the family was stunned, standing around like their own living room had become a foreign place. I watched my father step into that room the way a man steps into church, slow, respectful, not taking up space that wasn't his. On the way back, he asked me, "Did you notice how they looked at me?" "Looked at you how?" I said, like I knew what to do. I didn't answer, because I had noticed. I'd also noticed it wasn't power. It was responsibility, and responsibility, if you're built a certain way, feels like a calling you can't quite outrun. That's when I came back for good. By 1973, I was the man people came to. I never loved that idea, but it was true. I knew where the spare keys were, knew the florist's number by heart, knew which families didn't want music, knew who needed time before they could look at anyone, and I knew paperwork. People don't understand how much of this job is paper. When someone dies, the world doesn't stop to mourn. The world asks for full names, birth dates, times, causes, signatures, places, registry numbers. Miss one letter, and you turn grief into a line at an office. Insurance won't pay. Benefits don't come. Burial gets delayed. Pain becomes paperwork. My father taught me to treat that part like it mattered, because it does, if you're going to carry a man to the end. He used to say, "Don't make his family suffer because you were careless with a pen." That's where my principle came from, the one thing in me that was both pride and weakness, depending on the day. I don't falsify paper. I can be discreet, I can be gentle, I can protect a family from humiliation, but I won't write down a lie that becomes a record. That doesn't mean I was a saint. I'd made small accommodations, like any man living in a town where life isn't clean. If a family asked me not to repeat a humiliating detail during a viewing, I didn't. If someone wanted the room closed to keep gossips out, I closed it. If a mother didn't want the preacher to say certain things in public, I quietly made sure he didn't. I understood that dignity, sometimes, is protection. But there's a difference between protecting a family from people's mouths and changing the official story of what happened. For me, that was the line on the floor. Mary knew that line. She knew me better than I liked to admit. We married young. She was the daughter of a postal man, orderly, steady, the kind who believed in doing things the right way, even when nobody was watching. Mary kept a home, like she kept a boat in rough water, balanced, practical, quiet. She knew how to set out food for grieving families without making it about herself, knew how to touch a widow's shoulder and leave before the moment turned into a confession. It wasn't coldness. It was wisdom. Sometimes she'd say to me, "Lo," when the town started to press, "You don't have to carry it all by yourself." And I'd answer, "I'm not carrying it. I'm just doing it the right way." She wouldn't argue, but I could see in her face she understood the risk. In our town, the right way wasn't always the safest way. Our boy, Tommy, was nearly grown. He talked about Indianapolis, school, work, anything that wasn't the same 4 blocks and the same names. I didn't hold him back. A small town grips you with comfort and fear, and I wanted him choosing his life by hunger, not by lack of options. Still, I couldn't deny a quiet pride that he wasn't built to spend his whole life on the same corner. I'm telling you that because without a family, a man becomes nothing but his work, and I never wanted to be only that. I wanted, despite everything, to be ordinary, eat supper in peace, sleep through the night, wake up without the phone changing the whole day. But my life was built out of interruptions. There were people in town who treated a funeral home like just a business, and I didn't blame them. It was a business. I paid electric bills. I paid wages. I paid for flowers and supplies and maintenance. But there was another side that didn't have a price tag. For example, I could tell when a family was breaking inside before they admitted it, the way a man gripped his hat too tight, the way a daughter looked at the clock and then at her mother, the way someone asked about the cheapest casket with shame in their eyes. I saw those things and I adjusted without announcing it. I set up payments. I knocked a little off the total. I found a way. My father had done the same, and I kept it going, not because I was trying to be good, because I wanted to look in the mirror and still recognize the kind of man he raised. That code had a cost, though. The bank didn't understand code. The bank understood numbers. I had an old loan, repairs, the hearse, upkeep, everything that adds up. Patterson would greet me with that soft voice and steady smile, but his pen didn't care about my father's name on the wall. "You've been responsible," he'd say, "but we need to keep those payments right on schedule." He talked like it was morality, when it was plain math. I also had competition, the bigger place in the next town, and even a younger man sniffing around to start something similar, sold modern comfort. efficiency, shine. I didn't compete on shine. I competed on trust. But trust, in a town where the plant controlled the clock and the bank controlled the future, could be undercut by a change in the wind. I knew that. I acted like I didn't. And that's why, when that plant employee showed up with a form to make things easier, I should have felt a deeper chill. I should have remembered that paper, in the wrong hands, turns into a tool. But I was still living in my father's old way of thinking. Do your work. Keep your corner clean. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong. At that point, I still believed death was the one thing that came for everybody. I hadn't understood yet that in that town, some deaths came in a way that helped other things stay standing. My father had a habit of ending hard conversations. If I asked him about some old case, a strange wreck on the road, a man found down by the river, he'd say the same thing every time. Truth comes out, son. Might take a while, but it comes out. I grew up believing that the way you believe in seasons. Now I think he wasn't saying truth shows up all by itself. I think he was saying that sooner or later, somebody decides to stop sweeping dust under the rug. I wasn't that somebody yet, not at the start of 1973. I was just a man trying to keep an old house running, keep my name clean, keep my work decent. A man who wanted to believe the town was made of simple people, clear rules, honest effort. And because I wanted to believe that, I didn't see right away what was coming straight at me. My code, I don't falsify paper, was going to be tested, and it wasn't going to be an accident. It was going to be tested because somebody needed me to bend. And when you spend your life helping a town keep moving, the town learns how to ask you for things it wouldn't dare ask anyone else. By late winter, when the phone rang on a night colder than usual, and the voice on the other end sounded too rushed, I still didn't know it was the beginning, but I felt it. Even without understanding it, the work was about to stop being routine, and when routine disappears, all you have left is the man and the code he's living by. That call came in on a Wednesday, a little after midnight. One of those nights where the cold doesn't make noise. It just slips through the cracks and settles in. I woke up before the second ring, not because I was brave, because I'd been trained by years of it. Mary shifted beside me and let out a short breath. I felt her hand touch my arm, light, automatic, like she was saying, "Be careful," without saying anything. I went down the stairs with my coat in my hand and answered halfway down the hall. Carver Funeral Home. On the other end, Sheriff Minton's voice came through with that practiced calm he kept, even when things weren't calm at all. "Sorry to bother you this late, Tom. We had an accident at the plant. Need you over at the hospital." He always said need like the whole town was speaking through him. I asked only what I had to. Name, age, whether the family knew. He answered short, clipped, no extra detail. "Eddie Garner, 29. Wife's on her way. Klein's here." Then right before he hung up, he added something, soft, almost casual. "And if anybody asks, it was just bad luck. Equipment failure. You know how it goes." It wasn't a threat, it was a steer. In a small town, steering can pass as concern. "I'm on my way," I said, and hung up. On the drive to the hospital, I could see the plant lights in the distance, bright as a ship at night. Cars lined up near the gate. A couple of men in heavy jackets stood outside, smoking slow, like keeping their hands busy was the only way not to shake. I didn't stop. I'd learned not to stop. The hospital was small, better suited for babies and flu than for sudden trouble. The emergency entrance smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. I saw Minton right away, leaning against the wall near the door, talking to a man in a suit I recognized as one of the plant supervisors. Not the top manager, not the kind that made speeches, but someone with the posture of a man who knew where keys were kept. When Minton saw me, he gave a tight little smile. "Tom, appreciate you coming quick." I nodded and went straight to what mattered. Asked for Dr. Klein. A nurse led me down the hall without meeting my eyes. Like looking too long would be disrespect. Inside the room, Klein had his sleeves rolled up and that worn-out look he carried the way other men carried scars. There was a bloodied cloth in the corner, and I didn't need details to know it had been fast and ugly. Still, Klein wasn't acting shocked. He was acting worked over, like this was one more weight on a stack. "Tom," he said, lowering his voice. "Press accident. Happens." He said happens in a way that didn't fit a 29-year-old on a gurney. I didn't answer right away. I looked with the professional distance you learn so you don't fall apart. Then I looked at Klein's hand. There was the slightest tremor, so small you'd miss it if you weren't trained to notice small things. "ID confirmed?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Wallet was on him. Sheriff confirmed." I didn't doubt it. Not like that. Not then. What bothered me came later, when someone handed me the early paperwork and I saw the way the language had already lined itself up like it had been rehearsed. The preliminary form, no final signature yet, already carried the same clean phrases. Equipment failure, workplace accident, accidental death. It wasn't the first time I'd seen those words, but the timing was wrong. The ink felt too fresh for a man who'd just died, and it wasn't Klein's handwriting. It wasn't the nurse's. I took note and kept it to myself. A detail like that can be nothing. In this work, exhaustion can make you suspicious. In the hallway, the plant supervisor came over. Polite, trained, firm handshake, eyes right on mine. "Mr. Carver," he said, using my last name like I was a file. "We appreciate your professionalism. Eddie's family will be taken care of. The company's covering the costs." I hadn't asked. He offered before I could even open my mouth. Maybe it was kindness. Maybe it was strategy. Either way, it came too fast. "I'll speak with his wife when she gets here," I said. "She decides what she wants." "Of course," he said. "We just want to make things easier." Behind him, Sheriff Minton watched. Quiet. He didn't interrupt. He didn't have to. I went back later when Eddie's wife arrived. Linda, along with an older woman, maybe her mother or aunt. Linda's face was red, but her eyes were dry, like her body hadn't caught up to what had happened yet. She asked if she could see him. I explained calmly what was possible and what wasn't. How to be honest without being cruel. She nodded the whole time without truly being present. The older woman gripped her purse with both hands like it was holding her together while we talked. The supervisor came back, not to comfort, but to manage. He spoke to Linda like he was giving instructions. "Linda, the company will handle the expenses. You don't need to worry about that right now." Then he lowered his voice just a little. "The important thing is we keep things calm for you and the boy." The boy? Nobody had told me Eddie had a child. Linda's head moved just barely. Yes, and I saw something in her face that told me calm didn't mean peace. It meant silence. When I left the hospital, Minton walked with me to the door. "You okay?" he asked, like a man. "I'm fine," I said. He looked out toward the parking lot, the shadows between cars, and spoke lower. "This kind of thing shakes a town. We need to keep rumors down, Tom. Rumors turn into trouble." I stared at him an extra beat, not because I wanted a showdown, but because I wanted to understand. In our town, rumors were about affairs, debts, drinking. This was a dead man. Why was the first priority rumor? "I'll do my job," I said. It was the closest I could come to saying, "Don't ask for more than that." Minton nodded. "That's why we trust you." Trust, said like that, wasn't a compliment. It was a fence. Back at the funeral home before daylight, I opened my ledger and wrote it down. Eddie Garner, 29, plant, press. Under it, without explaining, paper came early. I didn't know what it meant yet. I only knew it bothered me enough to become ink. When Eddie arrived later, brought in, I went into the back room and did what I always do. I treated the dead man like a man, not like an incident. I won't describe what doesn't need describing, but I will tell you this. There were signs of hard work and a short life. Hands marked up, nails stained with grease, an old callus on one finger that spoke of the same tool used day after day. A man who built things for other people and didn't get much time to build for himself. I thought about the child I'd just learned existed. I thought about the way the supervisor said, "For the boy." Like that was a lever he could pull, and for the first time I felt something shift inside me. Something I didn't yet have a name for. The sense that certain people in that town knew exactly which words to use because they'd used them before. That night, after I locked the back door and stood alone in the hallway, the house creaked in the cold. The sound felt like a warning. I didn't see a pattern yet. I didn't have proof. I had a ledger, a line from the sheriff, and the bad feeling of a death being forced to fit a mold. And at that point, I still wanted to believe it was just about keeping rumors down. But I'd already learned one thing. When people hurry to explain a tragedy, it's usually not because they care. It's because they're afraid of what the tragedy might reveal if they leave it alone. Eddie Garner's viewing landed on a Friday because that's how towns like ours handle grief, by fitting it into the calendar. A man dies. Wednesday night. Thursday. The family tries to understand what happened. Friday. Everybody shows up. And by Saturday, the plant wants folks back on the line, like the world didn't just open up and swallow somebody. That morning, I had the curtains opened early and told Mary to make 2 coffee thermoses instead of 1. When a plant man dies, people come in waves. Too many bodies, too many hands that don't know what to do with themselves. Coffee, on days like that, isn't just something to drink. It's an excuse to stand up and feel useful for a minute. Linda came in before the arranged time. I saw her through the glass in the front door, a small purse clutched tight against her side, and a little boy holding the hem of her coat like it was a rope that kept him from drifting away. He couldn't have been more than 6. He walked like he was trying to keep up without asking questions. Kids learn fast. When they sense the grown-up is breaking, they make themselves smaller. When Linda stepped inside, she looked around like she'd walked into a place she didn't belong. That's the trick grief plays on people. The room is set up for them, and still they feel like strangers in their own lives. "Mrs. Garner," I said, offering my hand. "Tom Carver." Her handshake was quick, barely there. She nodded. "Thank you," she said. It was the first full sentence I'd heard from her since the hospital. The boy stayed half behind her. I crouched a little, not as a performance, just because it's wrong to tower over a kid on a day like that. "And you are?" I asked him. He looked at me with big, wary eyes. Linda answered for him, like it was easier for her to speak than to let him. Danny, I repeated. "We've got a little room back there with some books and pencils. If you want to draw for a bit, you can. Nobody's gonna bother you." He didn't move. Linda didn't push him. They just stood there a second, like every choice had weight. Mary came down the hall with a plate of cookies and that quiet smile she had, the kind that didn't demand anything from you. "Linda," Mary said, using her first name like she was handing her something solid. "You want to sit a minute before folks start coming in? We've got time." Time in a funeral home is always a gentle lie. Still, Linda took a deeper breath and followed Mary into the small side room where families sometimes gather before the doors open. I stayed with Danny. He looked toward the book room, then toward the front door, then back at me. "Your dad like drawing?" I asked, just to give him a path to speak that didn't lead straight into pain. Danny shrugged. "He made cars," he said, voice thin. "At the plant?" He nodded. It wasn't much, but it gave me a picture. A man coming home with metal dust in his hair and still making little cars for his kid at the kitchen table. A man trying to leave some joy where he could. When the first visitors arrived, I opened the front room. The town came in like it always did, some with real respect, some with curiosity, some because they knew they had to show up or it would look bad. 2 men from the plant came in wearing suits I didn't recognize. One carried a large flower piece with a ribbon that read something like, "With respect, management." The word sounded too big for a worn carpet, and a family in shock. They caught me near the door, the way a man catches you when he wants to make sure you're reading the same script. "Mr. Carver," the older one said, "the company is covering the expenses. We've already spoken with the bank, too, to make things easier for Linda. She won't be left stranded." He wasn't asking, he was informing. "She'll decide what she accepts." I said evenly. His smile stayed on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course, we just want to avoid hardship. In times like this, the town needs to stand together. Stand together. Another beautiful phrase that worked like a fence. I saw Sheriff Minton come in with his hat in his hand this time. He shook a few hands and made his way to me. "How's she holding up?" he asked, in shock. I said. He nodded. "Hard thing, but the company's doing right by her." I watched how he said the company, like it was a person with a conscience. In our town, sometimes it was treated that way, like the plant had a heart, a temper, and its own set of rules. Reverend Watkins arrived soon after and went straight to Linda. He spoke to her in a low voice, asked if it would be all right to say a prayer later. Linda agreed, mostly because she didn't have the strength to refuse. The room filled. Men in work jackets stood off to one side, quiet, hats held to their chests, like it was part of the uniform. Women gathered near the coffee table and talked low, trying to find the right place between kindness and gossip. I moved through the room like I always did, not to control people, but to keep grief from turning into spectacle. In this work, you learn to spot the moment a sentence is about to cross a line, and that's when I heard it. The first time I realized the accident had already been turned into a story. Two plant men stood not far from the front door, talking like they were discussing the weather. "Shame," one of them said. "But he was tired, you know. Night shift. A man loses focus." "Yeah," the other answered. "Eddie was a good worker, but these things happen. Rushing, mistakes. You can't blame the company." I stopped for half a second without being noticed. That wasn't an honest conversation. That was a line being practiced. The same idea laid down soft, like wiping a stain before anyone could point at it. I kept walking. I looked over at Linda. She was seated in the corner with Danny on her lap, like he was the last piece of the world she could still hold. The boy stared at the closed casket without understanding. Linda wasn't crying loud. Her tears sat in place, as if her body hadn't learned the proper motion yet. When I got closer, Mary was beside her. "Linda," Mary asked, "have you eaten anything?" Linda shook her head. Mary set a glass of water in her hand with care. I watched that small gesture and heard my father's voice in my head. Dignity doesn't come automatic. Somebody has to hold it. Later, when the room thinned out, Linda asked to speak with me privately. I brought her into my office. Danny stayed with Mary in the little book room, drawing something that looked like a boxy car. Linda sat in the chair across from my desk and held her purse in her lap like a shield. "They said they're going to pay for everything," she told me, and help with the house. "You don't have to decide anything today," I said, using my father's old sentence the way a man uses a tool. She took a deeper breath and, for the first time, looked straight at me. "I don't want trouble," she said. I just wanted him to come home." It wasn't melodrama, it was fact, and that's what made it heavy. "I know," I said. And I did. She worried the strap of her purse, nervous. "The supervisor told me it was equipment failure," she went on. "But Eddie'd been complaining. He said the press was catching, like it was grabbing wrong. He told his section boss, and the boss said it was in his head." I kept my face still. In this work, you learn to keep your expression quiet when someone sets something dangerous on the table. "Did he say that to anybody else?" I asked. Linda gave a small, bitter half smile. "To who? A man at the plant talks, and nobody wants to listen. He just wanted to finish his shift and come home." I thought about that form showing up too early. I thought about the supervisor telling her to keep calm. I thought about the men near the door repeating, "You can't blame the company." Linda lowered her voice like the walls had ears. "They told me if I keep quiet, they'll help. The bank will help. The church will help." She looked at me like she needed permission just to breathe. "I don't know what's right," she said. "I just know I have a boy." That did something to me. Not anger at her. Anger at the way the town turned pain into a bargain. "You have the right to stay quiet," I said carefully, "and you have the right to speak. But either choice has a cost. You don't have to pay that cost today." She nodded, and I could tell that was all the comfort she could carry. When she left my office, I stayed there a moment alone, staring at my desk, my typewriter, my stamp. I saw myself, suddenly, in the middle of something that wasn't only grief, it was management, control, a whole network of hands, helping too fast, asking for calm too fast, explaining too fast. That evening, when Reverend Watkins prayed, he talked about trials and mysterious paths and strength for the family, and I watched the room as he spoke. I saw the plant supervisor bow his head in a perfect show of respect, and I saw Sheriff Minton standing steady, like he wasn't only keeping order, he was keeping the version. After folks left, Danny came into the hallway holding his drawing. He offered it to me without speaking. It showed a little car with a cross on top, crooked, and two small stick figures beside it. "That you?" I asked, pointing to one figure. He nodded. "And the other?" I asked. "My mom," he said. I didn't ask who the cross was for. I didn't need to. I took the paper carefully, like it was something official, and handed it back to him. "Keep it," I said. "Someday you're going to want to remember what you drew today." He looked at me like he didn't understand, then ran back to Mary. When I locked the front door and turned off the lights, I opened my ledger and wrote under Eddie's name. "Linda says the press was catching. Help came with a condition. Keep quiet." I still didn't know the size of what I was writing down, but I could feel it, clear as the silence after a room empties, that death wasn't being treated like a tragedy. It was being treated like an adjustment. And when a town starts treating death like an adjustment, it's because there's something bigger. It's trying to keep running, no matter the cost. After Eddie Garner was buried, the town did what it always did, went back to work. Monday came with the same smell of smoke from the stack, the same trucks rolling through, the same storefront doors opening like nothing had happened. If you walked down Main Street, you wouldn't see mourning. You'd see normal life. And I'd learned, in my line of work, that normal is the most efficient disguise there is. At the funeral home, I washed out the coffee cups, had Mary set aside what flowers could still be used, and tried to convince myself it was over. Plant accidents weren't new. The difference, I told myself, was just the rush to explain. The way everybody seemed to know what happened before the family even had time to ask. But life didn't give me much time to pretend. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday night, the phone rang again. This time it wasn't the sheriff. It was the hospital. "Mr. Carver, this is reception. We've had an incident at the plant. A man came in and didn't make it. Sheriff's been notified." "What's his name?" I asked. "Raymond Doherty. Folks call him Ray. 42. I wrote it down before I even hung up. In my world, when a name becomes ink, it becomes responsibility. At the hospital parking lot, it was the same picture. Patrol car, ambulance, and a plant man talking to somebody near the entrance like he had a role to play, and like he'd been summoned by my thoughts. Sheriff Minton appeared in the hallway, hat in hand, his face too calm. "Tom," he said, "appreciate you coming." I didn't waste time with small talk. "What happened?" "Fall," he said. "Slipped. Hit his head. Bad luck." There it was again. Bad luck. Same tone, same smoothness, like someone had taught him the phrase. Dr. Klein was there again, too. This time he looked more irritated than tired. While he filled out the forms, he avoided my eyes. I watched his pen move fast, without hesitation, like he was copying something he already knew by heart. "Ray have family?" I asked. "A teenage daughter," Klein said without looking up. "And an ex-wife, a teenage girl. An ex-wife, a different kind of grief, one that already had cracks in it before death showed up." When the preliminary paperwork came into my hands, I saw the same structure, the same ready-made language: workplace accident, accidental death, fall. Still no final signature, but the story was already there, neat and simple. On the drive back, I pulled into my own parking lot, shut off the engine, and sat there a minute with my hand on the wheel, staring at the dark building. I could go upstairs, sleep, and pretend. Or I could do what my father always did when something felt wrong: pay attention. The next morning I opened my ledger, flipped back to Eddie's page, and wrote the new name beneath it. Ray Doherty, 42, plant, fall. 2 deaths in a few weeks. The plant was big, I told myself. Accidents happen. But 2 things were starting to line up in my mind. The speed of the paperwork and the vocabulary. I wasn't an investigator. I wasn't a journalist, but I was a man of records and repetition. And repetition is the most common way the truth asks to be noticed. Ray's viewing was smaller. Fewer plant men showed up. Maybe the town had already spent some of its sympathy on Eddie. Maybe when death repeats, people start protecting themselves. Ray's daughter came in wearing a jacket too big for her, and a kind of anger that didn't fit inside her body. She didn't cry. She looked around like she was searching for somebody to blame, and I saw the tightness in her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was carrying a scream. I didn't force conversation. I offered water, a chair, quiet. But when she stood near the closed casket and stared for a long time, I heard her whisper, not to me, more like to the room itself. They didn't fix it. I heard him talking. I stored that sentence the way I stored anything that was too small to make the paper, but too big to ignore. Later, when the ex-wife arrived, the air tightened. There was a brief flare of words cut off, somebody pulling them apart. I watched that scene and saw the town in miniature. Grief mixed with blame. People trying to organize something that refused to be organized. Sheriff Minton came through again, just for a few minutes. He made his appearance, shook hands, said, "Tragedy," and when he passed me, he murmured, almost kindly, "Tom, let's keep this simple, all right?" Simple was another pretty word. It could cover a lot of rot. I didn't argue. I just watched him leave too quickly, like he was doing a duty, not mourning. That evening, after the room emptied, Mary found me in the hallway and said without accusation, "You're different, just tired." I lied. She looked at me like she knew the lie was protection, not deception, and let it go. The 3rd death came the following month, and that's when I stopped calling it coincidence. This time, it was a man named Calvin Ross, 36, listed as a respiratory episode after a shift. It didn't happen at the hospital. It happened at home. His wife called frantic, and I went out with Leon, my assistant, a young man who still hadn't hardened all the way. On the drive, Leon said what everybody was thinking, and nobody wanted to say out loud. 3 in not much time, huh? I didn't answer right away. "Plant's big," I finally said, repeating the old excuse just to see if it still held. Leon nodded, but his face told me he didn't believe it. At Calvin's house, the air was heavy with medicine and panic. His wife had 2 small kids, and they were playing on the carpet like nothing had happened, because children protect themselves with play when grown-ups are breaking. The wife told me, between broken sentences, that Calvin had been coughing for weeks. "That section's full of dust," she said. "He talked about it, but who's gonna complain? You complain, you lose your shift." She said it like she was describing the weather, like it was nature. On the paperwork, Dr. Klein wrote something like, "natural causes, aggravated by exertion." I read it and felt the same discomfort I'd felt after Eddie. The sentence was broad enough to fit anything. Convenient. Clean. Worst part was, I'd expected it. That night I sat at my desk, opened the ledger, and wrote the 3 names in a column with dates and causes. Next to them, I made notes in my own plain language. Paper rushed. Same words. Minton present. Plant men helping. Family says equipment not fixed. Dust. Night shift. I stared at that list and felt something I hadn't expected. It wasn't only sadness anymore. It was a cold that didn't come from the season. It was the feeling that somebody, somewhere, had already accepted this as a cost. And when a town accepts death as a cost, it needs 2 things to keep going: silence and paper. That's when I began to understand my position in a new way. Not as a man who handled the dead, but as a man who could see the trail the town wanted to smooth over. I didn't want that. Nobody does. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. The next week I did something simple. I started paying attention to time. Not just the hour the phone rang, or the hour I drove out, But the hour the paperwork appeared, the hour the sheriff arrived, the hour a plant representative offered help, and I started noticing a strange regularity. The offers came early, before the family had time to ask questions. The language in the documents came in the same shape every time, like somebody had a set of approved phrases, a manual for keeping everything simple. I didn't tell anyone. Not Mary, not Leon, not the pastor. I just kept writing it down. In my work, writing things down is its own kind of prayer. You don't always know what you're asking for yet. You just know you're asking for clarity. One afternoon, I stopped at the bank to drop off a payment and noticed a display on the wall, photos of citizens of the year. Almost every face had ties to the plant, the courthouse, or both. I looked at those pictures and thought of Eddie, Ray, Calvin, men who were never going to end up framed on any wall. On my way out, Patterson greeted me with that same soft voice. "Tom, how's your family?" "Fine," I said. He smiled, then added, like he was discussing rain. "These accidents, shameful business, but the plant is what keeps us going. We've got to support it." Support was another wide word. I left the bank with the feeling I'd stepped through an invisible doorway. Up to then, I'd been looking at deaths as separate tragedies. Now I was starting to see them as a set, and when you see a set, you're usually looking at a system. I went back to the funeral home, shut my office door, and sat a long minute with my finger resting on those names. I didn't have proof the world would call proof. I had a pattern, repeated language, early help, fear dressed up as unity. But I knew in a way that settled heavy in my chest that it wasn't finished, and somehow I knew something else too. Sooner or later, the town would try to make me part of the machinery, because I was the man who wrote down the ending. And in a town like ours, whoever controls the ending controls a whole lot more than people like to admit. It was after the third death that the town started moving around me differently, not in some loud way you could point to and say, "That's the moment everything changed." It was more like a wind shift you don't notice until the door that always closed on its own starts banging. The first week of April, I got a call from the bank in the middle of the morning. "Mr. Carver, this is Mr. Patterson's secretary. He'd like to see you today, if possible." Banks don't say if possible when it isn't necessary. Banks say it because they've already decided it's necessary. I went after lunch, took my hat off at the door, and smelled that clean mix of paper and polished wood. Patterson greeted me with the same smile as always, but his eyes had a sharper kind of attention, like he was measuring distance. "Tom, sit down," he said, motioning to the chair. "Coffee?" "No, thank you," I said. He opened a folder and laid a few papers on the desk, the way a man lays down something he wants to pretend is neutral. "I've been looking over your accounts," he began. "You've always been responsible. Your father was too, but we're in a delicate moment." "Delicate for who?" I thought, but didn't say. He continued, "There's been movement in town. You know that. The plant's had some incidents. That affects everybody. It affects confidence. It affects credit. It affects business." He said business and looked at me like he was reminding himself my place was, to him, a number on a page. "I'm current," I said. "Yes, you are," he answered too quickly. "But the bank has to protect itself. We're reviewing terms, interest, timelines, collateral." The word collateral fell into the room like a tool. "What kind of collateral?" I asked. He gave a small smile, the kind a man offers right before he tightens a screw, perhaps an updated contract. Nothing dramatic, just formalizing. Formalizing, that's what they called it when they wanted to tie you down. I looked at the papers without touching them. It wasn't an open threat. It was the kind of conversation that teaches you. You live here because we allow you to. Patterson lowered his voice, almost like he was doing me a favor. "Tom, you're a pillar in this town. We need you to stay a pillar. And for that, it's best you don't get involved in interpretations." Interpretations. He didn't say questions. He didn't say accusations. He said interpretations, like the issue was my eyes, not what had been happening. Heat crawled up my neck, but I didn't raise my voice. My father always said a man loses the moment he starts shouting. "I do my job," I said. That's all we're asking, Patterson replied, sounding relieved, like I'd signed something without signing. I walked out into bright sun and a street that looked exactly the same. But I wasn't the same man who'd walked in. The next week, Reverend Watkins came to the funeral home in the middle of the afternoon. No service scheduled. That alone told me something. Pastors don't visit funeral homes on an ordinary day unless there's sickness or a message. He stepped in slow, hat in his hands, jacket pressed. He looked at the photographs on the wall, at the old hallway, like he was measuring history. "Tom," he said, "can I talk with you a minute?" I led him into my office and closed the door. Mary was upstairs in the kitchen. Leon was out picking up flowers. The pastor sat down, folded his hands, and paused. One of those pauses he used from the pulpit to pull people in. "I've been feeling the town restless," he began. "Restless, why?" I asked, as if I didn't already know. He sighed. "You know, these incidents, the families, the worry. We need peace." Peace, another fine word used like a lid. "I want peace too," I said. "Then," he went on, "I'd ask you to be careful about what you repeat and what you carry. You know how it is. In times like this, one comment becomes a fire." I watched him for a moment. Watkins wasn't in my office because he was cruel. He was there because someone wanted him there, or because his instincts always pushed him toward putting out flames. But sometimes putting out a flame is just a way of keeping something rotten from being seen. "Pastor," I said evenly, "I don't talk about people's business. I never have." "I know," he said quickly. "That's why I came. Folks trust you, and you have influence whether you mean to or not." Influence. It didn't sound like me. I was a man of hallways and quiet work, but it was true. In a small town, the man who's present on people's worst days carries a kind of weight nobody names. Watkins lowered his voice further. "Tom, people are saying things about machinery, dust, negligence, and it can split the town. Split the town. That was always the threat, like unity mattered more than life. I wanted to say, split it from what? From pretending? But I didn't. I said the only honest thing I could say. I don't control what people say. I only control what I put on paper. The pastor looked at me, and I could tell that sentence bothered him, because paper was exactly where they were trying to bend me. He stood and put his hat back on. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right," he said, returning to his preacher voice. "You know where to find me." After he left, I sat a moment, staring at the closed door. His visit had been gentle, but that gentleness felt like a glove covering a firm hand. Toward the end of April, I got a visit I didn't expect. Frank Pruitt, the owner of the newer funeral home in the next town. He was about 10 years younger than me, full of energy, always talking about improvements. Nicer car, sharper suit. The kind of man who said service the way other men said product. He walked into my front room like he was just passing through. "Tom," he said, smiling. "Been too long." "It has," I said, already uneasy. He glanced around like he was appraising the building. "Beautiful place," he remarked. "A lot of history." "Sure is," I answered. Frank pulled out a chair and sat without being invited, like familiarity was part of his business plan. "Listen," he said, "I've heard you're under pressure." I didn't confirm it. Pressure is not something you give a man in words. Not in our town. He continued anyway. "Tom, I'll be straight. If the town starts pushing you aside, for whatever reason, I can help. We could partner up. Or," he leaned in just a hair, "you could sell and get out from under all this." Sell. The word hit like insult and temptation at the same time. "Why are you offering me that now?" I asked. He spread his hands like he was being honest. "Because I'm a businessman, and because I know when the plant and the bank shift, everything shifts with them." There it was, spoken out loud. He'd named the hand on the board. I stood up slowly and opened my office door like I was giving him the path back out. "Frank," I said, "I appreciate it, but this place is my name. My father's on that wall. I'm not selling it out of fear." Frank gave a small laugh without humor. "Courage looks nice," he said. "Doesn't always pay the bills. Think about it." He left, and I was left with the feeling that even competition had become a tool, not because Frank was necessarily part of anything. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but because he smelled opportunity in the same wind the bank did. That same week, Leon told me a man had come by asking about availability for future services and writing down prices like he was making a spreadsheet. Leon described him, plain suit, office face. Not grief. He said he was with the city, Leon told me. Said they were updating records. Updating records. Again, always paper. The rest of that day I carried a buzzing in my chest. The town was closing in from every side. Bank, church, competition, city hall. Every one of them polite. Every one of them speaking softly. That night, Mary found me in the upstairs kitchen, my ledger open like I was doing math. "Tom," she said, "what's going on?" I looked at her and for the first time thought about the fact that my choices didn't just belong to me. "I don't know yet," I said honestly, "but I think people are trying to make these deaths fit a mold." Mary went still, then asked, "And you?" "I'm not going to write down a lie," I said, more to myself than to her. She inhaled, like she was bracing for a long winter. "Then the town is going to try to bend you," she said, "because around here, if you don't bend, you become the problem." I didn't like hearing it said plainly, but I knew she was right. Later, after everything was quiet, I went downstairs and checked the locks on the building, not because I thought anyone would come steal money or silverware. This was different. This was fear of someone coming for paper, coming to move it, hide it, make my ledger worthless. I went into my office, opened the drawer, and slid the ledger under a stack of old forms. Then I turned off the light and stood in the dark a moment. Out the window, the plant glow sat on the horizon, steady as ever, and I understood with a bitter kind of clarity that nobody was trying to convince me of anything. They were positioning me. They wanted me to be one more man saying bad luck, one more signature keeping everything simple, one more silence holding up the smoke. And by then I knew the first small turn. The paperwork that showed up too early hadn't been a detail. It had been a hand on my shoulder, polite, firm, ready to guide me somewhere I had no intention of going. May came in with light rain and thick heat, the kind of weather that makes a town short-tempered without it realizing. Mud gathered along the curb edges, trucks threw wet dust off the back roads near the tracks, and the plant kept pushing smoke into the sky, like it owned the seasons. I'd been carrying the weight of those past months like a box I couldn't set down, too heavy to hold, too dangerous to drop. I was sitting in my office sorting paperwork on an ordinary old man who'd died of heart trouble, nothing more than what life eventually promises, when Leon appeared in the doorway with his face gone pale. "Tom, it's the sheriff," he said, "and there's a plant car out front." The way he said plant car was enough. I stood, straightened my vest, and went out into the front hall. Sheriff Minton was there without his hat. Beside him stood a man I didn't know personally but recognized from town events. One of the lawyers who showed up at city functions, always in a dark suit, always with a smile that looked practiced. Behind them, standing like a shadow, was a plant supervisor, different from Eddie's, younger, but carrying the same careful posture. "Tom," Minton said in that calm voice he used to keep sparks from catching, "we need to talk." "Right here's fine," I said, not offering my hand. The lawyer smiled anyway. "Mr. Carver, thank you for seeing us. We won't take much of your time." They always said that when they meant to take control. I led them into my office and shut the door. I didn't lock it, but I thought about it. Minton sat like a tired man. The lawyer sat like the chair belonged to him. The supervisor stayed standing, leaning against the wall, eyes fixed on nothing. Minton started. "There was a serious accident this morning. A kid, young man, 21, name's Jerry Lasky." My stomach tightened. 21 is too young to have much of a life behind you, but somehow it's old enough to leave people who depend on you. "At the hospital?" I asked. "Yeah," Minton said, but he didn't make it. The lawyer set a leather folder on my desk. with the care of a man placing down something sacred. "Mr. Carver," he said, "we're here to make sure everything is handled properly and quietly, for the family, for the town, quietly." By then that word didn't mean peace to me, it meant a lid. "My work is always proper," I said. "Of course," the lawyer answered too quickly, like a man agreeing before he corrects you, "but there are details, and it's the details we need to address." He opened the folder. Inside was a death certificate form already partly filled out. Same clean phrases I'd been seeing. Workplace accident, operational failure, accidental death. There was another sheet as well, an alternative wording, even cleaner, almost scrubbed of place and circumstance. Heat rose in my face. "This," I said, touching the paper with just my fingertip, "isn't mine. I haven't even seen the boy." The lawyer kept his smile. "We're not asking you to sign at this moment. We're simply streamlining. You know how bureaucracy can be. Bureaucracy, like the issue was paperwork, not a dead kid." Minton cleared his throat, trying to keep the floor steady. "Tom, here's the deal. The family's in shock. The father's already talking lawyer, talking investigation, and that can turn into something big. You know how these things catch fire." Maybe they should, I thought, but didn't say. The plant supervisor finally spoke, low and apologetic, like he didn't enjoy his own words. "We're going to take care of the family, fully. Funeral costs, support, whatever's needed, but it has to be clear this was an accident, not negligence, not maintenance issues." The word maintenance slid into the room like a blade, because it was what Linda had said. It was what Ray's daughter had whispered. It was what Calvin's wife had described, and now it was sitting on my desk, being pushed under a sentence. I took a slow breath. My father always said anger makes a man stupid, and I wasn't going to get stupid in my own office. "Dr. Klein will sign," I said, testing the water. The lawyer tilted his head. "He'll sign what needs to be signed. But you have a role, Mr. Carver. People look to you. You understand how this works. When you write it down, things move forward. When you hesitate, everything gets stuck." There it was, not a request, a recognition of leverage and a warning. Minton looked at me with a kind of pity, like he was offering me the easy door. "Tom," he said, "you're a decent man. Nobody wants to put you in the middle. But you're in the middle, and the town can't handle a mess right now. If this turns into lawsuits, investigations, headlines, the plant could cut shifts, could lay off, and you know who pays for that. The same people always paid." I looked out my office window. Outside, the street still looked ordinary. A kid riding a bike, a dog in somebody's yard, the whole world acting like it wasn't about to be rewritten. I turned back to them. "I'm not signing anything I haven't seen," I said. Steady, no raised voice. The lawyer's smile stayed, but it cooled. "Naturally, you'll see him, and then you'll do what's best." "Best for who?" I asked before I could stop myself. A small silence landed. The supervisor looked away. Minton's jaw tightened. The lawyer answered like a patient teacher. "Best for everyone, Mr. Carver. Best for the family, for the child left behind, for stability." Stability, the word they used when they meant control. I stood up slowly. The chair creaked, and the sound felt too loud. "I'm going to the hospital," I said. "We'll talk after." The lawyer closed his folder without hurry. "We'll all go," he said. That's when I understood. They weren't there to ask. They were there to escort, to make sure I didn't end up alone with reality. At the hospital, the hallway was crowded. Not with gawkers, not yet, but with plant men and relatives. Jerry's mother sat in a metal chair with her hands clenched together, her face pale as a sheet. His father paced, anger looking for a place to land. An older man, uncle maybe, spoke low to someone and pointed toward the closed door. When I approached, the father spotted me and came straight at me. "You the funeral man?" he demanded. "Yes, sir." He stepped too close, his face flushed. "They're saying it was an accident, that my boy messed up. But I know my son. He wasn't careless. They don't fix anything in there. Everybody knows it." He said everybody knows it, like he was slamming a fist on a table. Behind me, I felt the lawyer and the sheriff, close enough to change the air. I looked at that father, and for 1 second I wanted to tell him, "You're not crazy. I've been hearing it too. But want doesn't pay for consequences, and I didn't yet know what it would cost that family if I said the wrong thing with the wrong ears behind me. So I chose the most honest sentence I could manage. I don't know the details yet, but I'm going to do my job the right way." He breathed hard, like he wanted to believe somebody still did things the right way. "I just want the truth," he said. His mother lifted her head, and I saw in her eyes a kind of fear that wasn't only grief, it was fear of standing against the town. Minton stepped in gently, practiced. "Mr. Lasky," he said, "let's step outside a minute. You need air." The father resisted for half a heartbeat. Then someone took his arm and guided him away, and I watched the town at work in miniature. Soft hands moving pain out of the place where it could become questions. Later, when I finally got a minute alone with Dr. Klein, I asked him quietly, "Klein, did you see it?" He looked at me with tired eyes, and for a moment I saw plain fear in him. "Tom," he said almost under his breath, "not today." "Not today what?" He swallowed. "Not today to talk about that." And that's when I understood he wasn't just choosing words anymore. He was trapped. When I got back to the funeral home that afternoon, I sat at my desk and stared at my typewriter like it was a weapon, because in a way, it was. The direct ask had been made. Write the sentence the way they want it, sign the line they point to, keep the town stable. And I knew, with a hard clarity, that refusing wasn't an abstract idea anymore. It was a decision that would touch my name, my business, my family, and the way the town would allow me to exist inside it. That night, Mary found me in the hallway and asked with her eyes if I was all right. I answered with the only truth I had. They want me to write the ending their way, and I understood then, if I bent once, I wouldn't be my father's son anymore. I'd just be another moving part, and in a town like ours, moving parts are replaced the moment they start making noise. A town doesn't react the way a man does. A man reacts with shouting, with slamming a fist on a table, with a door thrown hard enough to shake a frame. A town reacts with distance, with organized silence, with people crossing the street so they don't have to greet you. The week after Jerry Lasky's death, I felt that change the way you feel a shift in temperature on your skin before you can name it. The phone rang less for actual services and more for soft, pointless questions. Folks calling just to check on times, ask about prices, see what options there were. Nothing committed, nothing locked in. In my business, hesitation is a message. The bank didn't bother calling me in this time. Patterson mailed a letter. Clean letterhead, polite language, the kind of writing that looks neutral but carries a blade, an updated contract, a review of collateral, shorter timelines, the word default floating there like a threat, even though I'd never been behind. Mary opened it at the kitchen table, read it without a sound, and slid it toward me. The way she held the paper, firm, careful, told me she understood exactly what it was. It wasn't about money, it was about warning. "Can they do that?" she asked. "They can try," I said, "and we'll answer the right way." I heard myself say the right way, and felt how it had started to sound like stubbornness. Leon noticed the shift, too. One morning he came back from the florist empty-handed and said low in the hallway, "Florist said she's been getting orders from Pruitt's place for this weekend, here in town." I stopped, with my keys in my hand. "Pruitt's doing services here?" I asked. Leon nodded. "People are calling it just an option, like it doesn't hurt to compare. Compare. Nobody compares funeral homes the way they compare washing machines. They compare when they're being nudged." That Sunday, Mary and I went to church, not because I expected Reverend Watkins to take a swing at me from the pulpit. He wasn't that kind of man, but because I wanted to feel the air. You read a town better in church than you do at City Hall. City Hall wears a mask. Church's mask is thinner. The service looked normal on the surface. Hymn, prayer, sermon. But the sermon leaned hard on words like trial, and the danger of a loose tongue, and the poison of division. It wasn't direct, but it was pointed. And when Watkins said, Some folks don't understand the harm they cause. His eyes flicked toward the second row where Mary and I sat. Not accusation, signal. Afterward, two people who always shook my hand passed me with only a distant nod, like they suddenly had somewhere to be. A plant man I knew by sight came up close enough to speak, but he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Tom," he said, "you're a good man. Just don't pick a fight you can't win." He delivered it like advice. I thanked him like it was advice, but after he walked away, I heard the truth under it. The town had already decided where it would stand if things got ugly. Not on the side of right or wrong, on the side of survival. At home, Mary kept the routine tight the way she always did. Supper on time, bills organized, laundry folded. But when routine is threatened, you can see the effort in it. She listened harder for the phone than she used to. I watched her shoulders tighten when it rang late. One night, Tommy came home for dinner. He had that young man restlessness, already half turned toward a life beyond town lines, but still tied to us by habit and love. He caught the atmosphere before I said a word. "Dad, people are saying stuff at school," he admitted, pushing food around his plate. "They're saying you're messing with big people." Mary set her hand gently on his forearm, a quiet way of saying steady. I felt a quick flash of anger, not at my son, but at the town for using even kids as leverage. "I'm not messing with anyone," I said. "I'm just not writing down a lie." Tommy nodded, but I could see he didn't know whether that was courage or foolishness. And some nights I didn't know either. Midweek, Linda Garner showed up without calling. She came with Danny, who looked thinner and quieter than he should have been. Linda carried herself like someone running on pure nerve, past grief into endurance. Mary brought her into the side room. I hovered at the office door long enough to hear one clear line float out in Linda's low voice. "They cut my hours at the market." Mary asked something I didn't catch. Linda answered, "They said it was budget, but it was just mine. And the church lady who was helping with groceries, she stopped coming." Mary didn't preach. She didn't offer bright words. She said, "You eat here today, and you take what you need." Later, Linda asked to see me. Her hands trembled, but her eyes had gone steady, like something inside her had turned hard because it had to. "Tom," she said, "a supervisor came by my house, said I shouldn't be talking. I'm not talking, but it feels like they're scared, even when we just breathe." My stomach tightened. "You tell anyone about the press?" I asked, careful not to sound like blame. "Just a cousin," she said, "and she told me I'd be smarter to forget." She said. Linda glanced toward Danny, who was on the floor drawing with pencils Mary had given him. She said, "I have a boy." Then Linda repeated it, like it was both argument and prayer. "I have a boy," I wanted to say. I know, I wanted to say, "I'm trying," but by then I understood something hard. Trying doesn't shield anybody. Friday afternoon, as I was locking up my office, a man walked into my front room with the posture of someone who wasn't there for grief. No hat in his hands, no wet eyes. He had a small notebook in his jacket pocket, and a careful way of looking at the walls like he was searching for where stories hide. He stopped at my office door and didn't step in. "Mr. Carver?" he asked. "That's me. My name's Sam Rourke," he said. "I do notes for the local paper, and sometimes for a regional radio spot." He raised his hands slightly, like he didn't want me to feel cornered. "I'm not here to cause you trouble. I just want to understand." I should have told him to leave. I should have shut the door, but the way he said understand didn't sound like cheap curiosity. It sounded like a man who'd seen something and didn't know where to put it. "Understand what?" I asked. He lowered his voice even though it was just us. "These deaths," he said. "I've noticed the write-ups always come out sounding the same. I've noticed everyone repeats the same words, and I've heard you're not comfortable with it." The whole town had been pushing me towards silence, and here was a man offering the one dangerous thing there is, a voice. "You know what happens to a man who picks a fight here," I said. "I do," he answered. "My father worked the plant. I know what it is to be afraid of losing the ground under your feet." He paused, "But I also know when fear starts getting used like a tool." He drew a breath and looked me straight on. "If you've got anything anything that shows there's a pattern here, that this isn't just bad luck. I can take it outside to someone who doesn't eat supper with the mayor. That sentence landed heavy. Take it outside. It was the first time I'd heard anyone say it who wasn't threatening me. I held his gaze a long moment. In that time, I saw Jerry's father pacing the hospital hallway. I saw Linda saying, "I have a boy." I saw Ray's daughter holding her rage like a stone. I heard Dr. Klein whispering, "Not today." I saw the lawyer closing that folder on my desk. I didn't promise anything. I didn't invite him into my confidence. I just said, "I'm not a headline kind of man." Sam nodded like he understood exactly what that meant. "Neither am I," he said. "I'm a record keeper, same as you, just on my side of the street." He set a card on my desk and left without pushing. That night, after Mary and Tommy were asleep, I sat alone in my office and pulled my ledger from the drawer. I turned the pages like a man looking at old scars. Names, dates, repeated phrases, the same people showing up. A whole town training its tongue not to say what it knew. The building creaked in the dark, and I thought, with a tired kind of clarity, I'd been keeping those notes thinking it was caution. But by now, caution was starting to look like part of the problem. Because the system wasn't asking me only for a signature. It was asking me to accept that this was normal, and I couldn't accept it anymore. The day after Sam Rourke came by, I tried to go back to being nothing more than the man who did his work. I met with a family whose father had died of old age, talked about flowers and cemetery times, replaced a flickering hallway bulb. Small tasks, the kind you can hold in your hands, like trying to cover a big hole with a dish towel. But something had changed. I'd heard a man say, out loud, that there was an outside to our town, and once you know there's an outside, the inside loses some of its power. That week, Dr. Klein showed up at my funeral home without a call. That was rare. Doctors don't come to a funeral home on a normal day unless they're there out of duty or out of guilt. I saw his car pull up and felt my chest tighten. Not fear, exactly. More like the sense that the machinery had shifted again, and I couldn't tell if it was about to crush me or open a door. He came in with his coat half-buttoned, no hat, like he'd forgotten manners on the way over. His eyes looked hollow. "Tom," he said, not sitting down. "You got a minute?" "I've got a minute," I said, and closed my office door. He stayed standing, staring at my typewriter like it was the guilty one. "I can't stay long," he said, "and I didn't come for polite talk." "Then say it," I replied. Not harsh, just plain. He took a deep breath, and for a second the doctor dropped away, and what was left was just a tired man. "I signed things I shouldn't have signed the way I signed them," he said. "I didn't celebrate. It wasn't a victory. It was confirmation." "Why?" I asked. He rubbed his face like he was trying to wipe the last few months off his skin. "Because I'm the only doctor on call half the time. Because the hospital needs donations. Because the city needs things not to turn into scandals." He looked down at the floor. "Because I've got bills, Tom." It was the most human explanation in the world, and that's what made it so ugly. Life traps people. I didn't interrupt. A man who's come that far needs to empty himself out in his own order. Klein continued, lower now. "After Jerry, they called me in. It wasn't the sheriff first. It was a city lawyer and a plant man. They talked about terms, about how to write, about how to avoid wording that brings lawsuits. Heat crawled up my neck. "And you agreed?" I asked, though I already knew the shape of the answer. He shut his eyes for a beat. "I agreed to the vocabulary," he said. "I didn't invent a death, but I took the sharp edges off. I wrote it wide. I made it fit. That was it. The deaths weren't fake. The mold was." I set my palm on the desk, slow, so it wouldn't look like I was losing balance. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. Klein looked at me, and for the first time I saw real fear behind his tiredness. "Because I hear you're keeping notes," he said, "and I hear the bank is squeezing you, and I know they won't stop until you sign the way they want." His throat worked. "And because I saw something." "What did you see?" I asked. holding my voice steady. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a paper folded into quarters. It wasn't official looking. It was wrinkled, like it had been yanked from somewhere and carried around in a pocket because he didn't know where else to put it. "This is an internal memo from the hospital," he said. It came mixed in with a supply delivery. Somebody left it on my desk by mistake, or on purpose. I don't know. I took it carefully, the way you take a letter from somebody grieving. The memo was short. No big screaming language. That was what made it dangerous. It talked about standard procedure for workplace incidents, recommended consistent descriptions, and requested that body release follow a coordinated flow with company representative to avoid delays and noise. Noise, that word turned my stomach. Not because it was dramatic, because it was cold. It turned human death into reputation management. "Is there a signature?" I asked. Klein pointed. There was a name, an administrator, and at the bottom a legal contact I recognized immediately. The same lawyer who'd sat in my chair. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It wasn't the whole case, but it was the link I needed. Proof that this wasn't just the plant helping. This was coordination. Hospital, legal, company, a system. "Why didn't you take this to the sheriff?" I asked. Even though the question felt unfair the moment I said it, Klein gave a humorless little laugh. "Which sheriff?" he said. "The one who shows up before the family does." He didn't need an answer. He stepped closer to the desk. "Tom," he said, "I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm asking you not to let this die in a drawer, because it's burning my hand." I looked at the paper, then at him. He'd spent his life signing things to save lives, and now he was standing in my office asking the man who handled endings for help. There was a bitter kind of irony in that. "Do you trust me?" I asked. He hesitated, like he was weighing risk. "I trust your code," he said. It was the strongest thing he could have offered. After Klein left, I sat alone for a long time with that memo in my hands. Outside, the street sounded far away. I could hear Mary upstairs, drawers opening and closing, dishes set down, doing small ordinary motions to keep the world from breaking. I thought about calling her down and telling her everything. But once you say something out loud, you set it on somebody else's shoulders, too. By late afternoon, I went to the back of the building and opened an old storage cabinet full of boxes. I found an empty one and placed the memo inside, then covered it with a stack of worthless forms. I shoved the box into the darkest corner, like hiding it was protection, but I already knew. Hiding wasn't a solution. It was a delay. I went back to my office, picked up Sam Rourke's card, and stared at it. It wasn't blind trust. It was a choice between two risks: speak and pay, or stay quiet and become part of it. That night, after Mary went to bed, I called Sam from the downstairs phone. Not from my office line. I can't explain why. Maybe because I didn't want the house, my house, to hear it. He answered on the second ring. "Sam Rourke." "It's Tom Carver," I said. There was a brief pause on the other end, like he'd straightened up. "Yeah," he said softly. "I was hoping." "Don't hope too much," I replied. "I don't like this." "Fair," he said. "Talk to me. If I hand you something," I said, "you don't run it here. You understand that?" "I do," he answered without hesitation. "If it surfaces here first, they bury the story along with you." The bluntness chilled me and relieved me. A man who speaks plain is rare when everyone else is hiding behind wide words. "I've got paper," I said. "Shows coordination, standard language, body release. The lawyer's involved. Do you have a copy?" he asked. "I've got the original," I said. "Wrinkled. That's it. Then we do it right," he said. "We copy it outside town. 2 sets, 2 hiding places. Then we give it to somebody who doesn't owe the mayor supper." I shut my eyes for a second. It was exactly what I feared, and exactly what I needed. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning," I said, before my courage could cool. "Before folks are up. I'll meet you near the old bridge on the road out," he said. 6:30. You get in my car. We drive. No talking at the gas station. "All right," I said, and hung up. Before dawn, I woke up without the alarm and went downstairs to my office. I opened my ledger and ran my finger down the names again. Eddie, Ray, Calvin, Jerry. 4 men, 4 families, 4 versions of the same mold. I pulled the memo from the cabinet and put it in a plain folder with the ledger. I also added the bank letter, because by then I understood that letter wasn't separate. It was part of the pressure, part of the same machinery. When I went back upstairs, Mary was awake. She looked at me like she already knew I was going somewhere. "You're going to do something," she said. Not a question. "I am," I answered. She drew a slow breath. "This could finish us here," she said, honest in the way that hurts. "It might," I admitted, "but if I don't know if I can live inside myself afterward." Mary held my eyes a long moment. Then she reached out and took my hand. "Then do it right," she said. "Don't do it angry. Do it the way you always are." I nodded, and in that moment I understood my code wasn't stubbornness. It was the only map I had. When I left the house before the sun came up, the air was cold and clean, and the plant smoke was already rising on the horizon like always. But now I saw that smoke for what it was, a sign that the whole town was running on carefully chosen words. And I was about to do the only thing a man like me could do to crack that system. I was going to take the paper someplace it couldn't be smothered. I was going to carry the record outside. The sky was still gray when I pulled over by the old bridge on the road out of town, where the pavement gave way to open stretches and houses started to thin out. I spotted Sam Rourke's car before he spotted me. Just a plain sedan with tired paint. Nothing that drew the eye. Parked like he was waiting on a fisherman, not a story that could get a man buried. I got into the passenger seat without saying good morning. We acknowledged each other with a nod. On a morning like that, words felt too big for the air. Sam checked his rear view before he started the engine. "You bring what you said you had?" he asked. I lifted the folder without opening it. "I brought it," I said. He gave a short, "All right," and eased onto the road. No sudden speed, no drama. Like haste itself was an invitation for trouble. We were out of town in minutes, but it felt like crossing an invisible border. His radio stayed off. The silence wasn't respect, it was caution. He drove us to a place I didn't know, behind a hardware store in a bigger town, where nobody cared who came and went. A man with glasses, the owner of a small print shop, greeted us without questions. Sam had clearly been there before, for smaller stories that still mattered to somebody. The copier churned and clicked, spitting out pages like it was nothing more than work. I watched those sheets stack up and felt an odd kind of relief, almost shameful, like every copy took a little power away from the original. Sam slid the copies into 2 brown envelopes. One went into his car. He handed the other to me. "You don't keep that at the house," he said. "You keep it where only you know." I nodded. I already knew the place. A little dead space above my office ceiling, where my father used to stash old building paperwork. It wasn't a safe. It was just forgotten. And sometimes being forgotten is protection. From there, Sam took me to a state office where he knew someone. Not a buddy, not a friend, a contact. A tired-looking man in a plain jacket who had the face of a public worker who'd seen too many counties try to hide too many things. He brought us into a small room and asked a clean, direct question. "You're the funeral director?" He confirmed. "Yes," I said. "You've been keeping dates and repeated language?" he asked. I opened the folder. I showed him my ledger. I showed him the hospital memo. I showed him the bank letter. I didn't tell a big story. I wasn't built for speeches. I showed patterns. I showed paper. I showed what a record keeper can show. He read, marked a few things with a pencil, and then looked up at me with the first human expression he'd shown. "This isn't final proof," he said, "but it's enough to open a compliance review, and if it's what it looks like, it won't stay at the county level. Won't stay at the county level." Those were the words I needed, the kind of words that meant the town couldn't fold it back into itself. I walked out with my legs shaky, not from fear exactly, from months of tension unwinding all at once, like I'd been holding my breath since winter, and didn't remember how to breathe. Sam dropped me back near the old bridge without ceremony. "If they start messing with you," he said, "you call me, not your home phone. Use the payphone at the gas station outside town. You know which one." I nodded at everything. My head felt far away. When I got back into my own car, I sat there with my hand on the wheel, staring down the road, like I was waiting for the world to give me a sign that I'd done the right thing. The world doesn't give signs like that. It just keeps moving. For the first few days, nothing happened, and that was the worst part. A town defending itself knows how to go quiet. Sheriff Minton kept smiling. Reverend Watkins kept preaching peace. The plant kept running. The bank kept mailing letters. I nearly convinced myself I'd thrown my life into a fire that didn't even catch. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 cars with out-of-county plates parked on Main Street. Men nobody recognized stepped out with folders in their hands and walked into City Hall without looking around. In a small town, that's thunder on a clear day. Nobody needs an announcement. Everyone feels it. By the next morning, the local paper ran a short, dry note tucked away in a corner column. "State representatives visit municipality for review of workplace safety procedures and record practices." It didn't say the plant. It didn't say death, but the town read it like it was printed in big black letters. That same week, a state investigator came to my funeral home. No badge polishing, no big talk. Just questions from a man who understood people like me don't enjoy commotion. He introduced himself, showed credentials, and asked for records. "Mr. Carver," he said, "we're reviewing recent workplace fatalities. Do you have dates and stated causes?" I took a slow breath and pulled out my ledger. I didn't make a speech. I showed him what I had. He wrote down names, requested copies, asked who brought paperwork, how quickly the sheriff arrived, how often a plant representative appeared. His tone stayed calm, but it had direction to it, something I'd never heard from anyone local. When he left, one weight lifted off my chest, and another settled in its place, because now it wasn't just me and a notebook. Now it was real, and real things have consequences. The town's reaction came exactly the way I'd come to expect. Distance. At the barbershop, a man who always talked to me went quiet. At the grocery, a woman looked at Mary like she was carrying illness. Reverend Watkins came by to check on us and spoke in soft phrases about hard times and prudence. He didn't accuse, but he didn't defend either, and I didn't blame him. He was a pastor of a town, not a pastor of an idea. Sheriff Minton showed up one night at my back door after I'd closed the front room. He came alone. "Tom," he said, his hand resting on the doorframe like he wanted permission to step in but didn't dare. "What is it?" I asked. He stared out into the yard. "They've got state people here," he said like I didn't know, asking questions. Too many questions. "And?" I said. He turned his face toward me, and for the first time I saw something I hadn't seen in him before. Weariness. Not clean repentance. Not a full confession. Just the fatigue of a man who'd spent too long holding a lid on a boiling pot. "You know this is going to shake everything," he said. "Jobs, the bank, the whole town. And you know why it's shaking," I answered. He went quiet. Then he said, almost a whisper, "I tried to keep the town standing." "At whose expense?" I asked. His throat worked. He didn't answer. There wasn't an answer that wouldn't hurt. Before he left, he said only, "Watch yourself, Tom," and he walked away like a man who'd chosen wrong. Not because he was born crooked, but because he'd chosen early and didn't know how to undo it. What happened over the next few months wasn't the kind of ending you see in movies. It was paper, meetings, suspensions, quiet resignations, transfers. It was the plant, replacing supervisors without making a show. It was the hospital changing administrators. It was City Hall, calling it a restructuring. It was change that comes without fireworks, but still changes how people breathe. Some men fell. The lawyer who'd sat in my office stopped appearing at community events. The bank got strict with certain people and flexible with others. like it always did. The sheriff didn't lose his job overnight, but he lost his shine. And in a town like ours, losing your shine is the beginning of leaving. The plant, under pressure, did what it only ever does when forced. It announced safety upgrade, replaced some equipment, put up new warning signs, held training meetings that used to be ignored. None of that brought anybody back, but slowly, the midnight calls came less often. They didn't disappear. Death doesn't disappear. But the rhythm changed. The mold cracked. Linda Garner found work again. Not back at the market, at the school cafeteria. It wasn't justice. It was survival with a little less fear. Danny grew some, and one day he showed up at my door with a new drawing. A small stick man holding a folder, an old bridge in the background. He didn't know what he was drawing. Not really, but I did. Kids understand more than they can say. I paid my own price. The bank didn't ease up. If anything, it tightened, like it wanted to teach me courage comes with a bill attached. I sold off a small piece of land my father had held behind the building for a workshop that never got built. I delayed repairs. I watched business dip for a stretch while people treated me like the man who brought outsiders into town. Mary carried that weight beside me without complaint, but I could see the sadness in small things, how long she took before stepping out the front door, how she avoided certain old friends, how her eyes tracked a strange car rolling slow past our place. And Tommy left at the end of that year, not angry, not estranged, just decided. Before he got on the bus, he hugged me and said quietly, "Dad, I don't know if I could have done what you did, but I know I'll remember it." It was the closest he came to saying he was proud, and it was enough. Late in the year, Sam Rourke stopped by and handed me a clipping from a bigger paper out of town, talking about regional review, about systemic failures, about procedural violations. My name wasn't in it. I was grateful for that. I never wanted my name in print. Sam stood a moment in my hallway, looking at the old photos of my father. "You did it," he said, like it was a victory. I shook my head. "I just made it harder for them to pretend," I replied. Sam nodded. He understood the size of the world. Before he left, he asked, "Do you regret it?" I thought of Eddie, Ray, Calvin, Jerry. I thought of Linda holding her boy like a lifeline. I thought of Jerry's father begging for the truth. I thought of Klein in my office, that memo burning in his hand. I thought of the bank, the preacher, the sheriff, the plant, an entire town trying to keep itself intact while it was breaking people behind closed doors. "I regret what the town needed to be," I said, "not what I did." Sam left without another word. That night, after the building went quiet, and I turned off the lights, I went back into my office and looked at my ledger one more time. I didn't need to keep adding to the same pattern. The pattern had been interrupted, at least enough for someone from the outside to see it. I slid the ledger back where it belonged, not as a trophy, as a reminder of cost. Out in the distance, the plant stack still put smoke into the sky, thinner than before, but still there. The town still had to work. Still had to pay bills, still had to pretend sometimes that it wasn't afraid, but something had changed. There was now a little space where a person could say, "This isn't right," without the sentence dying in their throat. And for a place like that, that was change enough. I stood at the window a moment and heard my father's voice in my head again about dignity. Dignity doesn't arrive on its own. Somebody holds it. Somebody writes it straight when they're being pushed to write it easy. I turned off the last light and let the house sleep. Death kept coming, the way it always does, but for a while at least it stopped being part of the plan.